Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nikki Tickner, and I serve as Deputy Court Administrator over here for the 17th Circuit Domestic Violence Coordinated Courts. We are delighted today to be able to have the Liam Foundation join us for a discussion on human trafficking and domestic violence within the LGBTQIA+ communities. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping issues. A reminder to fill out your evaluation at the end of the program. That did come through in your reminder email, and I will also put it in the chat as the end of the program approaches. If you have any questions throughout the program, you can go ahead and throw those into the chat, and I will moderate those if you're good with that, Phyllis. And then also just a disclaimer that this is provided through our Family Violence Coordinating Council as well as our Domestic Violence Coordinated Courts. You will see those applicable disclaimers on the front slide there. So last reminder to mute yourself if you have not done so already, otherwise I will mute you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the Liam Foundation. So we today have Eden Brown, who is the program coordinator for the Liam Foundation, joining us, as well as Phyllis Galliseth, who is the executive director of the Liam Foundation. And I will turn it over to you, Phyllis and Eden. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to see all the names coming through and the different places that you're affiliated with. Thank you so much for taking time today to learn about this. We're here with the Liam Foundation, and we're going to talk about domestic and intimate partner violence and human trafficking within the LGBTQIA communities. And as Nikki said, this project was supported by a grant awarded by the Office on Violence Against Women. So first, we just want to give you a little introduction onto who we are. We're the folks who put the presentation together. Sky will not be with us today, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'll let Eden introduce themselves. I'm Phyllis Galliseth. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a social work student at Aurora University, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Liam Foundation. We're the first LGBTQIA resource center in the state line. So we serve quite a few counties in the area and even southern Wisconsin. I'm also a mother of 3. My oldest is my stepdaughter, Taya. She's in her last year at North Central for a master's program in Naperville. My youngest is Riker. He turned 9 in December. He's really creative and active, and he's in 3rd grade. He loves playing Minecraft and making art and creating costumes. My son Liam would be turning 23 on February 18th of this year. But tragically, Liam died by suicide shortly after his 18th birthday and weeks before he would have graduated from Harlem High School. We're here today because Liam was brave enough to come out as transgender when he was 15, and this is where my advocacy began. Fast forward to 2020, we opened the Liam Foundation, the first resource center located in Rockford, Illinois. And within months, we will be moving into a new location at 1005 5th Avenue in Midtown Rockford. So keep your eyes on us as we expand. We have social media pages. You can sign up for emails and watch as we grow into our new space. So Eden, if you'd like to go ahead and just introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. My name is Eden. I use any pronouns. And I am currently getting my bachelor's degree at NIU for becoming a getting my K through 12 teaching certificate. And I am a teacher currently and an educator and activist.
Awesome, thanks Eden. So we're just going to also tell you a little bit about the Liam Foundation and what we do before we get started with all this. We opened our doors in March 2020. Right around the time the pandemic hit. It's been a wild ride for us. We have served over 350 individuals and families in the LGBTQ+ community in Northern Illinois so far. We offer several services such as assisting in legal name changes, guidance with vital record changes, gender corrections. We also help coordinate with healthcare providers for hormone replacement therapy, We help with medical bills, prescriptions, therapy costs. We also offer case management for our clients, so we can provide them with referrals and additional resources. A lot of the clients that we do serve are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Many are couch surfing or living in unsafe environments. So we also provide hotel vouchers to help with housing costs on short-term emergency basis. So we just really want to thank you again. We're really grateful for this opportunity to be in front of all of you. You're seeing people out in the community who are LGBT, so it's important to understand this population and how you can better serve them in your work.
So first, we wanted to kind of start off with covering some basic terminology by watching this pretty brief video. Alongside this video, we really encourage you guys to explore all of the resources that we go throughout this presentation, as well as throughout the slides at the end of the presentation for further information on like specific terminology or identities that you might want to learn more about.
The first things to do when attempting to be a better LGBTQ+ ally or working toward creating a more inviting and inclusive space is to educate oneself. It can be daunting to know how to do or how to behave when there's so much we don't know about a community. Thankfully, the internet has a plethora of information to help get you started. One of the best places to start when first learning about the LGBTQ+ community is to start with basic terminology. Note that definitions are always growing and changing with the community as cultural norms change. Also, not every member of the LGBTQ+ community personally identifies with the terms, so always trust the person you are interacting with to self-identify and go with the definition they are comfortable with if they choose to explain or describe their identity to you. Lesbian. Women who are primarily attracted romantically, erotically, and/or emotionally to other women. Gay. Experiencing attraction solely or primarily to some members of the same gender. It can be used to refer to men who are attracted to other men and women who are attracted to women. An umbrella term used to refer to the queer community as a whole or as an individual identity label for anyone who is not straight. Bisexual. A person who experiences attraction to some men and women. A person who experiences attraction to some people of their gender and another gender. Bisexual attraction does not have to be equally split or indicate a level of interest that is the same across the genders an individual may be attracted to. It can be shortened to bi and is often used interchangeably with pansexual. Asexual. Experiencing little or no sexual attraction to others and/or a lack of interest in sexual relationships or behavior. Asexuality exists on a continuum, from people who experience no sexual attraction or have any desire for sex, to those who experience low levels or sexual attraction only under specific conditions. Many of these different places on the continuum have their own identity labels, such as demisexual, sometimes abbreviated to ACE. Transgender. A gender description for someone who is transitioned or is transitioning from living as one gender to another. An umbrella term for anyone whose sex assigned at birth and gender identity does not correspond in the expected way. For example, someone who was assigned male at birth but does not identify as a man. When it comes to gender, there are a few more definitions that might be helpful. Cisgender. A gender description for when someone's sex assigned at birth and gender identity correspond in the expected way. For example, someone who was assigned male at birth and identifies as a man. A simple way to think about it is if a person is not transgender, they are cisgender. The word cisgender can also be shortened to cis. agender, a person with no or very little connection to the traditional system of gender, no personal alignment with the concepts of either man or woman, and or someone who sees themselves as existing without gender, sometimes called gender neutral, or genderless. Gender fluid, a gender identity best described as a dynamic mix of boy and girl. A person who is gender fluid may always feel like a mix of the two traditional genders, but may feel more man some days and more woman other days. And gender identity, the internal perception of one's gender and how they label themselves, based on how much they align or don't align with what they understand their options for gender to be. Often conflated or confused with biological sex or sex assigned at birth.
Thanks, Eden. All right. So why are these conversations important for us to have? We feel it's important because members of the LGBTQ+ community have been mostly excluded from domestic and intimate partner violence awareness movement because it is largely concentrated on heterosexual relationships. However, according to current studies, the rates of domestic violence and intimate partner violence experienced by LGBTQ+ people are comparable or higher to those experienced by heterosexual people. There's also some key differences that are important to recognize, and we hope to shed light on a demographic that's often overlooked and left out and excluded. Not only are LGBTQ+ survivors' experiences downplayed or ignored by straight cis communities, but they also may face very own same in their own communities. Viewing DV and IPV as a straight or mask femme issue is not only incorrect, but it's also harmful to these communities. If we write off violence with LGBTQ individuals, we face that we're erasing them, making them irrelevant, isolating them, making them feel left out, not getting the support that they deserve. So we must remember that abuse is not tied to someone's size, strength, gender, or orientation, and that domestic violence comes in all shapes and forms.
So, understanding survivors of domestic violence also requires an intersectional approach. This term refers to the need to incorporate all aspects of an individual's identity as context to understand their life experience and reactions to the things they experience. For example, due to the prosecution of transgender individuals historically in the United States, the transgender population has the highest rates of victimization of domestic violence. In fact, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of all transgender individuals will experience domestic violence within their lifetime. The term master status was used by Everett Hughes in the 1940s to describe the tendency of observers to believe that one label or demographic category is more significant than any other aspect of the observed person's background, behavior, or performance. In 1954, Gordon Allport described master status as the label of primary potency in the nature of prejudice. Hughes and Allport are describing the tendency to define a person by one aspect of their identity rather than as a part of the whole. Some examples include referring to someone primarily by the color of their skin, such as a Black person, or their ability, such as a person in a wheelchair, or religion, a Muslim person, rather than these factors only being part of who they are. When applied to transgender people, master status refers to assuming that everything about a transgender person must be related to their gender. So we must keep in mind that LGBTQ+ identities are only one facet of a person's experience, and it's unique to them.
So we have some statistics to hit you with next. I'm sure we've all read lots of statistics in this work, especially with domestic violence and human trafficking, and the numbers are always shocking. But it's even more shocking in the LGBTQ community. LGBTQ population experiences domestic and intimate partner violence at alarming rates. A National Transgender Discrimination Survey 2011 and the 2015 US Transgender Survey found that trans people experience disproportionate rates of violence, and particularly trans people of color. According to the CDC, 46% of bisexual women have been raped, compared to 17% of heterosexual women and lesbians. 47% of transgender people experience sexual assault at some point in their lifetime. 44% of lesbian women and 61% of bisexual women experience rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. And this is compared to the 35% of heterosexual women. Gay men, we see 26%, bisexual men, 37%, and heterosexual men at 29% for experiencing rape, physical violence, stalking by an intimate partner. We also know that LGBTQ plus people, along with previous survivors of abuse, are the most vulnerable to abuse while in detention.
So in this video, the day ahead looks at LGBTQ plus domestic violence. We'll begin this video around the 2-minute mark, just because we've already gone over a lot of the statistics that we just mentioned.
University refer to something called the minority stress model. It says being part of a minority group contributes to high stress. The scholars at Northwestern say same-sex couples are dealing with the stress of being a sexual minority. One partner is physically taking their added stress out on another. Experts also use the double closet phenomenon as a contributing factor when discussing the topic with the BBC. They explained how some victims in same-sex relationships are reluctant to report abuse because they don't want to be outed by officials. As these trends become more widely known, assistance for victims is slowly but surely becoming more available. In the past few years, the Federal Violence Against Women Act expanded to assist everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. The CDC says it's focused on preventing all intimate partner violence represented in its research, because the key to creating respectful, nonviolent domestic relationships actually starts outside of the home with friends, family, and communities, respecting just how serious this issue can be. Now, when it comes to seeking help with domestic violence in the LGBTQ community, it can be tricky.
That's why I chatted with Dr. Adam Messenger. He's the author of LGBTQ Intimate Partner Violence Lessons for Policy, Practice, and Research. And he says the rates of domestic violence among same-sex couples are indeed higher. And he explains why.
Are the rates different among same-sex couples against opposite-sex couples?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Cody. There is surprisingly a difference. So people who have experienced same-gender relationships are actually more likely to experience domestic violence than people who only experience different gender relationships. And that's also been found to be the case for those who identify as sexual minorities, such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer, relative to heterosexuals. It's been true across the board for all forms of domestic violence. Psychological, physical, and sexual abuse rates are higher among sexual minorities.
Do we have any idea why?
That's a great question. It's a hard question to unpack because there are so many different factors that go into understanding domestic violence. Research has shown there's actually a lot of similarities in the risk factors for domestic violence among sexual minorities and heterosexuals, such as experiencing child abuse or witnessing abuse between your parents. scholars believe that there's a link between those youth family violence experiences and adulthood domestic violence, because you're exposed to abuse that makes you socialized into accepting abuse as a normal, healthy response to conflict. But if we're really going to try to understand why sexual minorities are at an elevated risk, we need to move beyond those common risk factors to helping us look at risk factors unique to sexual minorities.
Can we touch on some of those and just start listing those off of what is different within that unit than an opposite sex couple?
Absolutely. So on the perpetration side of the spectrum, some research suggests that experiencing homophobia and biphobia can result in extreme levels of stress. Now, minority stress, any form of stress, can be responded to in healthy ways, such as going to the gym to exercise, meditating, and so forth. Others will respond to that extreme level of stress using violence and aggression. So experiencing stress does not necessarily mean you will perpetrate domestic violence, but it is an increased risk factor. But on the victimization side of the spectrum, some research suggests that abusers will specifically target sexual minority victims that they believe are less likely to leave them, less likely to ask for help. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. So for instance, research suggests that sexual minority survivors have a difficult time recognizing they're being abused because they grow up in a society that's taught them that real domestic violence only occurs between a heterosexual man and a woman. In addition, sexual minorities oftentimes have additional barriers to seeking help. They might not have available resources in their local area that accept sexual minorities. They might not have resources in their area that have services that are designed specifically for sexual minorities. They might fear and experience discrimination by service providers, and all of those make it much more difficult for sexual minority survivors to reach out for help. Abusers who know that might feel more emboldened and empowered to initiate and engage in abuse.
After that interview with Adam, it made me, think about my upbringing in like rural America and how access to resources in a town of 2,000 people for the LGBTQ community
doesn't happen.
It doesn't exist.
No.
So it's even trickier to find that help.
And I think it's also important to point out that this is a social, this is not a group of people that you can measure in some way or that have necessarily like something in common that's like biological. So like this is clearly a social issue. Do you know what I'm saying? Like this is something that's as a result of something that's happening to these people. And that's why there has to be theories and not things that you can prove. Because I mean, what other explanation is there? Like we have to kind of dive into why is it happening this way to this group of people?
And I think your package did a great job at talking about that minority stress and the double closeted. They are tricky waters to navigate, but there are resources out there if you need them.
Yeah, they're real. They're real things happening. Well, if you find yourself in need of help, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7. Just call 1-800-799-7233. You can also reach out to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs at 212-714-1141.
Thanks again, Eden. So on the next slide, we're going to look at how there are unique elements of abuse in LGBTQ plus communities. Some examples would be the act of outing or threatening to reveal a partner's sexual orientation or gender identity. It could be used as a tool of abuse in a violent relationship, and it can also be a barrier which reduces the likelihood of help seeking. Survivors with poor experiences of physical or psychological trauma, such as bullying and hate crimes, they may be less likely to seek help as well. And abusers may tell the victim that no one will help them or that they deserve the abuse because of their gender identity or sexual orientation. Another way that we see this is that forcing survivors to engage in sexual acts to prove they're LGBTQ. Also claiming that the abuse is an expression of some desirable trait within an LGBTQ relationship. Like someone saying, this is just me being butch, which is why you like me. Abusers may also tell the victim that abuse cannot be domestic violence because it's taking place between LGBTQ individuals. In some cases, they may also deny the victim's identity by saying that at some point their behavior or identity did not conform to that person's definition of the label of the victim. So they could say, like, you've had a relationship with a woman, so you're not really gay. It's important as advocates to understand these challenges and to be able to recognize abuse in LGBTQ relationships that may not always look the same as heterosexual relationships.
There are particular concerns for transgender survivors. Trans individuals may suffer from an even greater burden of intimate partner violence than gay or lesbian individuals. Transgender victims of intimate partner violence are more likely to experience threats or intimidation, harassment, and police violence within intimate partner violence. Specific forms of abuse occur within relationships where one partner is transgender, including hiding or destroying hormones, purposely calling a trans person's body parts by the wrong names, refusing to use the name and pronouns that confirm the trans person's identity, using offensive pronouns such as it to refer to the transgender person, ridiculing the transgender partner's body and or appearance, telling the transgender partner that he or she is not a real man or woman, ridiculing the transgender partner's identity as bisexual, trans, femme, butch, genderqueer, and taking care to learn about these topics can be life-saving skills when working with the trans population.
We know that the LGBTQ plus community is one of the most at risk for human trafficking. LGBTQ plus people are particularly vulnerable to human traffickers, in part because there's a bias and discrimination in things like jobs and housing that gives human traffickers an opening to step in and pretend to be an answer to their problem. Sex trafficking is a form of modern slavery, and it exists through the United States and around the world. Sex traffickers use violence, threats, lies, debt bondage, and other forms of coercion to compel individuals to engage in commercial sex acts against their will. According to 2017 HHS report, it focused on enhancing the identification of trafficking victims. Of those who are self-identified and self-reported, 14% identified as LGBTQ. But the real numbers can be much higher because cases with LGBTQ sex trafficking victims are commonly overlooked. These victims rarely ask for help. We have a story from a survivor, Jose Alfaro, and he quotes, "A lot of male victims decide not to come forward because of the stigma behind it. Many victims are afraid that people are going to think that they're gay and maybe they wanted it," end quote. So next we want to look at the short video about Jose's story and what it's like to be a boy in the sex trade.
We have this idea from movies where a young woman is drugged, chained, and then taken to a different country. But what happens in our own neighborhoods, it's more stories like mine of boyfriends who form a connection with you and you trust them. And then you wake up one day and you realize you're being trafficked. I originally grew up in a very small town called Navasota in Texas. I didn't actually come out to my family. My parents went through my cell phone one day. At this time, I'm 15 years old. My father said, "I'm only going to ask you one more time, are you gay?" And I said, I'm not. And the second I said that to him, I got a fist to my face and I blacked out, hit the floor, and he kicked me into my abdomen. I got up, dialed 911 on our home phone, and he smacked the phone out of my hand. I didn't feel safe. And I remember thinking that if I had a relationship with someone who's older, they'll be able to protect me and they'll be able to give me the support and the love that I haven't been given my entire life. The first night, Jason treated me amazing. We went to lunch, we had dinners, and then the routine changed a little bit. He said, one day you're gonna wanna live a life on your own, and I think it'd be a great idea if you got a head start. And he said, I'm a registered massage therapist. I think it would be great if you gave massages with me. We had our first appointment set. The first thing I notice is the client has no clothing on and he's not under the sheeting that was provided. And then Jason began to take his clothing off. And I knew I had to take my clothes off. As the massages continued, they began to get more and more aggressive. I remember when things started getting to a point to where I had zero control over what happened to me. I had so many dreams. I had so many goals. There were so many things that I wanted to do. And suddenly I'm in this place where I'm not able to do any of it. Yeah. I'd probably say like half an inch we could take off and it'll be fine. Slowly but surely, I started to notice that I had to start taking care of myself. I had to find solid ground because I just felt like I was going to die from this feeling that I had. And I began working out with a trainer. The stronger that my body became, the stronger my mind became. And I slowly started to let go of the anxiety. I am a full-time hairstylist here in Boston, Massachusetts. I finally have a set clientele who love me, who support me, who come and see me once a month. I am also advocating and I'm helping others. When I first started creating content for TikTok, I was terrified of being myself. This is happening all the time. That was pretty good. And that's why I felt that I needed to share my story and I needed to come forward and help as many people as possible.
Thanks, Eden, for playing all the videos today. Appreciate it. Are we able to move to the next slide? There we go. Thank you. We are going to have some time at the end for discussions too. So remember Jose's story if you want to talk about that at the end. The Polaris Project has determined that along with LGBTQ people of color along with people of color, LGBTQ people are the most vulnerable to being human trafficked. So we see this repeated, and every slide that we're talking about, that LGBTQ people are, the most vulnerable, and that they're being abused and they're being trafficked. And we know that all the statistics are there. And yet, and still, the LGBTQ community is overlooked and forgotten, with LGBTQ plus youth the most vulnerable. LGBTQ youth face unique challenges because of their sexual identity, and many are victims of discrimination, abuse, and hate from their own families. And they might see that running away is their only recourse, kind of like we saw with Jose. True Colors United reports that 40% of homeless youth population are LGBTQ plus, as opposed to the general population of 7%. If we add the factor of homelessness, it leaves the already vulnerable population even more at risk. And traffickers are ready to take advantage of vulnerabilities specific to the LGBTQ youth, such as Jose's situation, where his parents had kicked him out and he was just looking for someone who could care for him, and come to realize that he's being taken advantage of and abused and trafficked. Traffickers also may feel that they are a substitute family for the LGBTQ teens that have lost that, and this creates compounded trauma for them. Whether it's building up physical, financial, or emotional dependence, traffickers present themselves as an answer to their deep questions of identity, acceptance, and belonging that survivors are experiencing. And this then re-victimizes the survivors, and they often feel trapped in their situation. And when this happens as teens, it makes it difficult as they move into adulthood to be independent.
Now we can talk about more protective measures that are needed. The Violence Against Women Act was passed in 1994 by President Bill Clinton. This act allowed federal grant funding to provide services related to aiding domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. It was not until 2022 that the Violence Against Women Act included a grant program designed to aid LGBTQ plus survivors of domestic violence. The state of Illinois should continue working towards examples of Washington's domestic violence laws, which provide equal protection to LGBTQIA plus domestic violence survivors. Currently, Illinois does not have an LGBTQ plus inclusive definition of spouse, partner, nor does Illinois have an LGBTQ plus inclusive definition of child and parent, which can work in favor of discrimination towards LGBTQ people.
So we often see barriers for these survivors when they're seeking services. And this can prevent them from reporting sexual violence, such as fear of being judged or not believed. Members of the LGBTQ community often face additional barriers to reporting or getting help. And one of them being that even if they get help, they may be reluctant to disclose their sexual orientation, gender identity to service providers when they disclose that they may face future discrimination or denial of services. So Eden was just meeting with an organization, for example, and was helping them with wording for their documents, and making sure that we inform the client why we're asking for this information, but also inform the client that it in no way will be a barrier for them to continue their services with the organization. So those things are really important. Some LGBTQ survivors may also be reluctant to report because they fear that it will reflect badly on their community, or they feel that they may be unjustly labeled as a predator. Some of the many barriers we see with LGBTQ survivors are societal beliefs of domestic violence, that it doesn't occur in LGBTQ relationships, potential homophobia from staff, providers, or from non-LGBTQ domestic victims that they may come in contact with. Also, a lack of appropriate training regarding LGBTQ domestic violence for service providers is another barrier. And a fear of airing the problems among the LGBTQ population will take away from progress towards equality, or that it could potentially fuel anti-LGBTQ bias. We also know that domestic violence shelters are typically for females only, and that transgender individuals may not be allowed to enter due to their gender, genital, or legal status. Another barrier is dangers associated with outing oneself and risking rejection from family, friends, and society. And we also see a lack of LGBTQ friendly assistance or resources. Low levels of confidence can contribute to this and the effectiveness of the legal system for LGBTQ people. So if we have a better understanding of what these barriers are, we can better prepare to break them down.
Next, we want you to look over the top 10 list for breaking barriers and think about how one of these could translate to the work you do currently in the justice system. How can you implement one of these recommendations to make your practice more inclusive of the LGBTQ+ community? We would like you to choose a number 1 through 10 and share with the group in the chat how you can personally break barriers. We will read them over and make a few selections to discuss as a group. So I will give you an example to help get the wheels turning. Number 1 states build partnerships in your community. So you could do that by reaching out to the Liam Foundation and requesting brochures to keep in your office. Therefore, showing your clients you are safe. You are a safe, welcoming person who cares about their demographic and offering resources to those in need.
All right, so John Gibbons says 2, training. So right, number 2, train staff to create a welcoming space. So like being here today is already a first step in breaking those barriers. Nikki also says 2 and 3. So improve ability to identify human trafficking. Absolutely. So some of the things that we learned today was cases that are specific to LGBTQ and domestic violence and human trafficking, and how to identify those situations. You know, oftentimes we may not realize that, you know, there's an age gap between a partner and who they're with, and they could be being taken advantage of. Maybe we assume that that's a different type of relationship when it's really a survival sex relationship. There's a lot of ways that we want to be able to identify human trafficking so that we can provide those services and break down those barriers. We can also work on making brochures, making sure brochures are available in the court buildings and related departments. Yes, absolutely. Someone else says 3, someone else says 9. Let's read that one. So host LGBTQ inclusive events and activities. Yes, we're always happy to partner with organizations. An example of that would be, we had an LGBTQ night at Race. So we ordered food, we gave away hygiene items, we talked about the services that were available, and we just kind of, you know, let everybody know that we're organizations that are working together to support each other. And so hopefully making Race a more LGBTQ friendly place where people who need those services feel safe to walk into that building and do so. All right, I'm just looking through the chat here. I see a new one, number 6. So adapting services to be included, absolutely. And like I said about Eden working with the organization, they're not necessarily adapting their services, but they are adapting forms which make that barrier to services easier, you know, because if you have to fill out a form that, you know, doesn't reflect who you are, it doesn't include information about you, or isn't taking care to be sure that you're accounted for, you may not want services from that organization. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people picking the same ones. I'm gonna pick a different one to talk about. Maybe actually Eden and Sky, if you each wanna pick one and kind of talk about a little bit, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I could talk about number 6. I think is really important since you guys are all working in um, important jobs when it comes to making sure that you're inclusive, making sure that obviously you guys are all here for this training, so wonderful. But just making sure that people feel safe, know that they are not going to be discriminated against, and doing that by doing these other like things like hosting events and stuff like that, but just making sure that you have things in place that collect people's correct names, correct pronouns. You don't want to be discriminating against any of the people that you are working for.
I really like the one that Amy just put in the chat too, that says that, it can be as easy as asking a person if they feel safe in their home, and it offers a door to the conversation. Yeah, just asking questions to get to know the person that you're serving and allowing them to tell you who they are, and building that rapport so that they can share with you. Questions like that is really important. Sky, did you want to go over one real quick?
Definitely. The one that catches my eye is number 8, which is allow flexibility in treatment or case planning. I think that when we are dealing with survivors of trauma, human trafficking, domestic violence, and their LGBTQ, it's very important to keep in the consciousness of your mind the fact that, just like the example I gave about the Violence Against Women Act, it wasn't until last year that it included grants that would specifically aid LGBTQ survivors. So some of the treatment plans or the case plannings that you use for non-LGBTQIA people, it may not apply, and having flexibility and making exceptions to the treatment or case planning is very important. And I only think that the exceptions will be necessary for as long as there isn't a direct approach and somewhat of a treatment and case planning that is designed to appropriately address LGBTQIA plus survivors.
Thanks everybody for playing along with that. You can hit the next slide, Eden. All right, so keeping this conversation going, how can you advocate for LGBTQ individuals in meaningful ways? It's really hard to say LGBTQ right so many times in a row. So if you make a mistake, it's okay. So we can collect data on sexual orientation, gender identity in population-based studies for IPV. We can increase the research on particularly vulnerable and understudied groups such as trans individuals, bisexual individuals, and sexual minorities. We can also adapt pamphlets, posters, materials on IPV to incorporate LGBTQ persons. Advocate for full inclusion of LGBTQ plus individuals in institutional and community IPV services such as hospitals, abuse programs, community shelters. Revising your resources and guidelines on IPV to reflect the burden of the violence in the LGBTQ community. We can also include information on LGBTQ plus IPV training and continuing education curriculum, incorporating testimony of LGBTQ survivors. There's a whole list of things here that we can do as advocates, and these are kind of also answers to the slide before. So all of these things are ways that you can advocate for LGBTQ individuals, which will then in turn reduce the barriers. Can you go to the next slide, Eden? We're running short on time, so I want to kind of go through this last slide here quickly, and then we'll go over our resources and stuff.
Special considerations for those working in the justice system. Not surprisingly, there is no standard definition of cultural competence, nor any uniform requirements related to cultural competence, diversity, or inclusion as it relates to the study of law, the legal profession, or justice system. All the while, LGBTQ plus people, especially LGBTQ plus people of color, are overrepresented in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. LGBTQ plus people are frequently targeted by and vulnerable to increased criminalization and abuse by law enforcement. They regularly experience assault and violence in correctional settings, and they face extraordinary challenges to rebuilding their lives upon release from the system, both because of their criminal record and because they are LGBTQ+. Cultural competence must include understanding and awareness of power and white privilege. Instead of solely focusing on disadvantage, we should also concern ourselves with privilege and domination. The Movement Advancement Project and Center for American Progress have explained how discrimination and stigma like family rejection, poverty, unsafe schools, and employment discrimination leads to criminalization. They argue that ending the criminalization of LGBTQ plus people will require broad social and policy changes, including but not limited to increasing support for LGBTQ plus folks within families, schools, communities, and other institutions, eliminating discrimination against LGBTQ plus people in housing, employment, and other realms, eliminating homelessness among the LGBTQ plus population. We can make a difference in lowering these risk factors and statistics for the LGBTQ plus community through spreading awareness, teaching cultural competence, and educating about the consequences of privilege and domination.
Thank you. I think that's one of the most important slides that we've covered. And we did make the PDF of these slides available to Nikki. So if anybody wants that, we have all of our links available. We have information with both of our websites. So we work closely with PFLAG Rockford, and we are the Liam Foundation. Those links are on that slide there. On the next slide, the next two slides, I believe, we have some national resources that are also available that cover some of these topics. Could you move to that slide, even the next one? And we've got the Trevor Project, the LGBT National Hotline, National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs. And then there's a second slide. If you could move to that, Eden, we'll show them those. And then we put some resource links also at the very end. So great. Nikki says the slides were included. Great. So they should be all linked through there. I tried to carefully be sure that each of these send you directly to the resource that you're looking for. And if you want to go to the next slide, Eden, we have a few minutes left to have some discussions, questions. If anybody has a question, I think it'd probably be easiest to type it in the chat and we can answer questions that way. Awesome. Someone would like to have some brochures for the Liam Foundation. Great. Our contact information is on these slides, so you can reach out to us through our website. Our emails are all pretty easy too. I can type those in the chat. Mine is executive director@theliamfoundation.org, and Eden is eden@theliamfoundation.org, and Skygia is skygia@theliamfoundation.org. Email is probably the best way to contact us and request materials. Do each of you want to type your emails in the chat, and then I'll type my own and they can have those?
I did just that. Feel free to reach out to me for any type of furthering understanding about the LGBTQIA plus community.
Any other questions, comments, anything sparked with learning about Jose's story or learning about, just domestic violence and human trafficking in general on LGBT? Nothing yet.
Obviously, if there's questions that you don't feel comfortable asking, like in the chat for everybody to see or anything like that, you guys have all of the ways to contact us. I am always open to educating people on a time that works for them, because I think it's extremely important.
This is Nikki. I was wondering if you could just explain the double closeted phenomenon a bit deeper. Is that addressing intersectionality, as you mentioned, or is it something additional?
I think more so with the double closeted is that like maybe you're out in certain situations, but you have to go into the closet because of like, you know, if you want homeless services or something like that. So you've been like recloseted into that situation because of like outside circumstances.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I need to log off soon for my meeting, but wanted to add remedies, domestic violence shelter, and all of our domestic violence survivors services available to survivors of intimate partner violence, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. Many other domestic programs in Illinois are as well. Thank you for this presentation and the work you're doing. Awesome. Thank you, Remedies, for being an ally. I think it's really important if you are offering these services already to people in the community, but that may not be known. How are ways that you can make it known? Can you put same-sex couples on one of your brochures? Can you put up a flyer somewhere, or, you know, a rainbow sticker, or put a flag in a vase somewhere? Those types of symbols are really important for people to just instantly recognize, okay, this is a place where people are going to know who I am, and, you know, I'm going to be safe. So a lot of times LGBT people may not know that those services are available for them if it's not made clear to them. So taking that clear stance and making it visible to everybody will help a lot in letting the community know that they're safe and welcome.
Is there any last questions as we're finishing up here? Well, as I'm just closing us up, feel free to throw anything that comes to mind in the chat, but just a reminder to please complete your evaluation. I put the link in the chat. It's in the email you received earlier. We do read them, we use them. I look at your feedback and comments on ideas for future training, so please take the time to do that. And I would like to also thank all of you for your attendance and attention today. And Phyllis, Sky, and Eden, thank you so much for sharing your time and talents with us.
Yes, thanks for having us. We're always happy to try to provide as much information. It's always hard because there's so much we can cover, and to fit it all in and to you know, let it all sink in. But please feel free, you know, if there's anything on the presentation that you have questions about or we're unsure or want to dig deeper on, we're happy to guide and help through those questions or concerns.
Great, thank you.